Each member of society participates in politics, so it is impossible to say, I am not in politics. Our organization is registered in Brussels because we believe Brussels to be the political capital of Europe. The state has a rich history, a very rich political history, thus it deservedly has the role of Europe's political center. Today's conference is devoted to development, a development which everyone needs, a development which probably does not exist today, and the current problem has ripened. We think that society more or less develops in a manner of a so-called tunneled scenario, where there is no option to have a multilateral development. The role and the goal of these tunnel scenarios is to confine the development of society, in other words, not to let people become humane. One of the latest events occurring in Europe is the conflict in Ukraine. More precisely, the situation in which instead of taking part at the table of negotiations to determine the objectiveness of the conflict, to describe possible resolutions, one of the conflicting sides is incapable of commencing a dialogue. In general, entertainment leads society towards degradation because people are not oriented towards creative constructive action. They are only oriented towards the satisfaction of themselves. This phenomenon blocks people psychologically and internally, and thus they begin to morally degrade. And if they are degrading morally, then after some time society's culture will degrade as a whole. This includes technical culture, and such a result may lead to serious danger. Culture provides many various options. In some cases, it tries to place the educational system under a certain standard of perceiving people. In other words, it imposes a certain standardized image by dictating how a dad perceives a situation, or a child, a mum, or a grandma. This signifies that the perception of the future depends on which standardized images we have in our mind. It is evident that a grandma's perception of the future is inadequate. It does not matter to her if a rocket falls or if a car runs someone over. Such examples prove that it is very crucial for us to choose a better scenario. Children are our future, and such futures form our society. One way or another, they determine in which future we will live. This is why children's movies are a very important component. Today, thank God, there are positive tendencies compared to the movies of the 90s. But either way, there is not enough of them. In this situation, there is little.
I like the presentation on the tunnel concept. That is they said it is somewhat simplistic in the sense that the tunnel concept must be applied after having solved the issue of the conceptual maze. I explained that as long as the human being lives in a conceptual maze, democracy shall necessarily lead to division and conflict. Speaking of freedom of expression or democracy means in fact expressing the individual's conceptual maze, and as long as this issue has not been solved, you won't exactly, there shall be some confusion regarding the tunnel concept, what kind of tunnel to take or not to take, and so this is certainly an issue. So that's one of the main points, one of the interesting presentations that attracted my attention. The other is the importance of the mindset. I think, the education of tomorrow, in fact, the notion of mindset or state of mind is central to the education of tomorrow. Because despite all the knowledge, all the philosophies, all the religions, all the technologies that have been accumulated since the beginning of humanity, the world system has nonetheless turned our planet Earth into a ticking time bomb. So there is a problem. There's a problem in the very way we think, in the very way we process data. So there is a need to look elsewhere. Where? Well, this where is precisely the state of mind, or the mindset.
There is a very asymmetrical relationship between big corporations and upcoming and promising talents in the world. So I do consider intellectual property and privacy, which are based on the same common value in terms of protection of the human person, aiming to provide to the society its best contribution for the global development and a collective happiness, or at least a peaceful keeping. And I would put it things like that. We do need early stage protection for the intellectual property for researchers, innovators, entrepreneurs at a world level, but we should consider very carefully the opportunity to suit at a WTO level a personal inventor who could be funded by a local state, for example a university or a governmental grant, if it represents a distortion of the competition from the point of view of a corporation. So in my perception, maybe it's not that easy to understand. The first things to do is not only to protect the intellectual property at a world level, which is possible with a new institution which generalize the intellectual property, patent for example, this is a very good example. But we should consider that competition must reinvent it permanently in the context where big corporations like Google, like Microsoft, like all those muggles in the media could use the WTO to impeach and to create obstacles to the funding of this first stage. So if only big companies can afford patent new ideas, they will do it maybe to not develop them. So to give its chance to new ideas in the current generations of emerging talents, we have to protect them to not to be able to reach the market.
To understand a system, it is necessary to go beyond the boundaries of that system, to look at it from the outside. This is why the European people see our culture from the outside, and we see Western culture from the outside too. Of course, these cultures interpenetrate in the battle with nature. The question of who will win, from my point of view, is obvious. The themes that are dominating in the West are for the most part biblical, and respectively the Bible ends with an apocalypse. In other words, there is not a very good ending. And if we are to scrutinize the development of Western civilization, we may notice that a lot of even Western professionals in various spheres, including sociologists, philosophers, write that all of that is already an hypothesis. Financial crisis, ecological crisis, the need to move to another planet, etc. Our picture is a little bit different. In fact, two pictures come to mind. Here we can see the three heroes. Ilya Muromets is looking at what is next. So in that case, it is possible to assume that there's not that much despair. Another famous picture is the knight at the crossroads, who is standing in front of the rock. Where should we go next? Which scenario should we choose next? So it is either going to be a tunnel scenario or a development, including the terms themselves as development, progress, innovation, which are currently being used or were used some time ago as a synonym to progress. These terms, in a sense, are a code, words, but behind them there is no clear image. And it is our duty to understand, to discover how and where we should develop, in what lays the development. Here is an example. Once again, in the Western civilization, a term, stable development. But the question is, can a development ever be unstable? So if it is a development, then it is always stable. And if such a word in the English language is added to the word development, then that development is in conflict with something. And if we are to consider the conception of Hocking himself, it turns out that the Western civilization is developing in a combat with nature. And the question who will win is, from my point of view, obvious.
Пацаники, корешок и корешок, пацаники, корешок и корешок. Зашьем дуне, зашьем дуне сарафан, сарафан, зашьем дуне сарафан, сарафан.